Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another video. Prior to the Andor series, very mundane and almost too human-like activities were kept to a minimum in the Star Wars universe, but they were always there in the background. Things like eating meals, sleeping, and I guess more Earth-like family structures and life were kept to a reserved minimum, which is really ironic because George Lucas always envisioned Star Wars to be a family-based space opera. But all of the family and home life things were done in the context of a galaxy far, far away. They didn't often resemble things on Earth. I mean, sure, there were a handful of examples of Earth-like things. For example, Aunt Beru in the kitchen, Luke drinking his milk and sharing a meal with his aunt and uncle, Shmi and Anakin hosting Qui-Gon and co, Anakin and Padme dining or sleeping together, and so on. But it was always something scarce and definitely not part of the main plot or character development. They were always background things. The acts of eating, cooking, and sleeping were not part of the story themselves. In the case of Episode 2's deleted scenes, we literally see Padme's family prepare a meal, gossip, and Anakin even goes for a garden walk with Padme's dad. But these scenes did not add much to the story, but definitely advanced the romance subplot, although I would say they made it a bit awkward, and it brings the main story to a halt in a sudden way, hence why it was removed from the final cut. But now with Andor, Tony Gilroy's series just did what George Lucas set out to do with some of this world building, but did it in an absolutely brilliant way that comes across as accidental, but is actually so important to the characters. Examples of this include Cyril and his mother Edie eating breakfast while she berates him, or even when she wakes him in the night because Mosk is calling from Ferrix. Or better still, him turning on the TV and learning of the heist on Aldhani. These actions have direct importance to the plot. Unlike when these scenes were background scenes in the main saga, in the Andor series, the show would lose so much emotional depth without these scenes, and yet at face value they're very non-Star Wars-y, at least in the classic genre and tone of the franchise. The world building is done so differently in Andor. Personally, I found these little quirky scenes valuable to the overall viewer experience. Other examples can be seen on Ferrix, when Bix drinks a cup of kaf, or when Marva boils the kettle. Home life in previous Star Wars shows and films were always done in a subtle way as background. If we go back to the example of The Phantom Menace, the important part of that scene is the conversation between Anakin and Qui-Gon. You're not really meant to focus on what Anakin is eating, and the same applies with the Attack of the Clones deleted scenes. Conversation revolved around Anakin's relationship to Padme. You're not meant to focus on the fruit or the salad. But in Andor, while the dialogue is just as important as those scenes, the show is written and directed in a way where there is pause for us as the audience to spend some time actually focused on what's happening in the background. The kettle is zoomed in on, as is the milk and cereal at the Khan household. As Tony Gilroy said, it has a symbolic meaning apart from just being a bowl of cereal. It represents that he's seen as a child by his mother despite being a grown man. When he was part of the Pre-Mors, he had an authoritative position, but when he returns to his mum on Coruscant, he's a kid again, and unfortunately treated as such. That is conveyed with simple things like the food he has for breakfast. In other words, it's not just there as decoration. As I say, there are mundane things in the Clone Wars and Rebels, but not this blatantly, where minor, everyday, almost un-Star Wars-like things actually contribute to the narrative being developed, and in a way, they expand our understanding of what Star Wars can be. George Lucas loved this kind of thing, because he always spoke about how wide and expansive the galaxy is. The creatures and beings within it all have lives. Not all of them are Force users, where every single action they perform is grandiose. There are just everyday workers like Bix and Brasso, who need their steaming cup of joe in the morning. You could even argue as part of this that the adult scenes in Andor, and we all know the one I'm talking about, contribute to our overall picture of Bix, her humanity. It's another reason why the torture scene hits so deep. She's a defenseless, everyday average person who doesn't have Force abilities or the power to defend herself against the Empire. Now I should say as a disclaimer that Star Wars has always ventured to do things in a way that don't feel Earth-like. Fans never wanted the galaxy far, far away to feel like a galaxy we live in, but little inclusions do help to convey messages in ways we understand. Even Luke's lunchbox in The Empire Strikes Back, which The Mandalorian Season 2 borrowed from, was a small addition to remind us that Luke is a physical human being and sustenance is part of our existence. It's well documented that George and Lawrence Kasdan reveled in creating an entire backstory for this lunchbox too. The scene in question happens when Luke arrives on Dagobah. He pulls out a small lunchbox and unenthusiastically begins snacking away at sticks and other edibles. As I say, it's one of the few times in the trilogies we actually see a character take a moment for a little nourishment. Luke is actually eating from a Rebel rations kit, which admittedly doesn't have the most tasty food contained within. Mark Hamill even noted that in that scene, his facial reaction wasn't acting. They mixed mix things like Tic Tacs and crackers, amongst other foods that really shouldn't go together. The stuff they put in that box tasted disgusting. It was never meant to be a gourmet meal though. It's a rations kit distributed to the rebels. This scene is also memorable, as well as the ones that follow, because we get to see Yoda try some of the food, which he immediately thinks is terrible. He literally says to Luke, "How did you get so big eating food of this kind? It's a rare moment in Star Wars." And then of course when he tries to get Luke to try some of the snake stew. These minor additions are so memorable, and they're fleshing out the world building and also the enormity of the galaxy and its inhabitants, their habits, and so on. But it didn't stop with the George Lucas movies and shows. LucasArts games and books also included these kind of things, so to see Andor as a show following George Lucas's line of thinking and add to it in a fun way makes me really happy to see, but also makes it so that it contributes to the overall story. It's not just thrown in. And in a very specific way, which Dave Filoni spoke about in the past, it adds to the fun of Star Wars. It makes us laugh a little bit, and the Mandalorian gets that perfectly right as well. I mean, just think of the soup scene in Chapter 11, I loved that. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of Andor is that it didn't feel like Star Wars, it just felt like generic sci-fi. Personally, I disagree. I think it showed us what Star Wars can be, other than things like Jedi and Sith. But that doesn't mean I think all Star Wars should be like this. If you don't like the Andor series, that's fine. There are plenty of Star Wars shows and eventually movies which are gonna cater to classic Star Wars, more lightsabers, the Force, and that kind of thing. But Star Wars Andor, to my mind, gave us something different and did it well. It wasn't afraid to take risks, and let's face it, learning about the early rebellion is a crucial part of understanding the overall Star Wars story. And on top of this, it's a 2-season show. Season 1 isn't all we're getting. There is plenty of time in the next 12 episodes in 2024 to connect it to things we've traditionally loved about Star Wars. In the most recent poll I put out in the community tab, I asked you guys what you thought of Andor Season 1. Here is the breakdown of the results. 52% of you said it was perfect, 33% says it was a good finale, 6% said it was just okay, 3% said underwhelming or disappointing, and 6% didn't even watch it, and that's pretty consistent across the board. A lot of Star Wars fans did not tune into Andor, so an interesting breakdown of the results there. I would say the majority of fans who saw Andor liked it. For me, Andor Season 1 was a huge win, but what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts of this and everything we spoke about in the comments down below. Do you think Andor was too Earth-like? Did you enjoy these aspects of the show? I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video guys, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and if you want videos you can't find here on YouTube while also getting your name at the end of my videos, then click the link down there in the description. But until the next one my dear friends, may the Force be with you always.